Nice buns, soft, fluffy, and ultra-low net carbs. Discover Hero Bread, the delicious, ultra-low net carb bread with incredible taste and texture. Hero Bread has 0 grams of sugar and is under 100 calories per serving. Plus, high in fiber with 5 to 10 grams of protein per serving. Order from hero.co now and get 10% off your first purchase with promo code AH10. That's 10% off with code AH10. HERO.co.
This is
Make It Plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson.
Make it plain.
Get woke.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's head down to Tennessee and see a fellow Tennessean and hear about all of the great work she is doing at a place that many of you, especially in this audience, have undoubtedly heard of. If you know anything about movement history, civil rights history, Rosa Parks, Dr. King, etc., you've heard of the place I'm about to mention. And that's the Highlander Center. As a matter of fact, Reverend Barber has, to some extent, brought it back into the vernacular movement because he spent some time down there. And I think it's important that we all go there and renew ourselves in those waters, so to speak, those intellectual waters and spiritual waters. So we're very fortunate today to have someone with us. So I, as you all know, I left Tennessee, been in the big city ever since. She stayed. She stayed back home to organize, and we're so thankful for her doing this. She is the co-executive director of the Highlander Center for Research and Education. Ashley Woodard Henderson joins us on Make It Plain. Ashley, how are you?
I'm great, and I'm so excited to be joining the Make It Plain family. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we're excited to have you here with us. How are things going down at the Highlander Center these days? How have you all been coping with the pandemic? How's your programming been under those circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to think about. I became the first Black woman executive director at Highlander back in December of 2016. So right after it was announced that, Donald Trump would be the 45th president of the United States. And I thought that was hard. And then in March of 2019, white supremacists tried to burn down our administrative offices. And I thought that was hard. And then 2020 happened, and March came around as we were remembering the attack on our sacred space the year before. All of a sudden, these shelter in place orders started dropping, and COVID hit. And then the uprisings of the summer, the election of November 2020, the insurrection on January 6th that I feel like we had been screaming was a possibility for years by that point. And then, the flipping of the Senate in Georgia, right? Like just all of these things happened. And I think that what white supremacy and capitalism meant for evil has actually, in some ways, been for our good, right? I think it showed that this is spiritual work, that they were trying to break our spirits, and their violence and attacks on our movement infrastructure has failed. So if anything, I feel like I bring the gospel of the Southern Freedom Movement and of the Highlander Center really specifically to spaces when I get that question. I think that the work that we've historically done for almost 90 years now, right? We'll be 89 years young this year, has led us to a place of figuring out how to not only bring people together across difference, to learn together, and then to implement that new learning in terms of changing, the material conditions of our people and our communities. We've figured out how to do that in a more scalable way, in an innovative way in a 21st century context. So people ask what we're up to. It's like, well, we're doing the same thing we've been doing since 1932. We're just figuring out how to do that in these conditions. And so what that's meant is breaking up the urban-rural divide around around digital access, right? We became our own internet service provider. We put up an internet tower And we provide it for ourselves and other folks in our community in Newmarket, which for folks that know Tennessee, which you do, Reverend Mark, it's like in between Knoxville and Gatlinburg. If you know where Dollywood is, we're close to that. So what that's meant is that right at a time where what we were used to doing was gathering people on our 186 acres in the foothills of the Smokies or going into the field with them, when COVID required that we be physically distant, we got to practice social solidarity because we had access to, these resources like the internet, which people take for granted. We had access to Zoom and all of these things that now are popular vernacular. But at that point, in early 2020, wasn't necessarily something that everybody across the South was using. And so how are our programs? They're awesome. They're awesome. We're doing really good, all things considered, with all the attacks that have been on our work. We're still doing popular education. We're doing intergenerational organizing and support. We're doing movement accompaniment support. We're fiscally sponsoring organizations like the National Bailout Collective. So if you've ever heard of the Black Mama's Day Bailout or Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity, we fiscally sponsor them. The Stay Together Appalachian Youth Project, so many others. We're doing good, and it feels great to be not only relevant in a 21st century context, but to be actually practicing what we preach around movement accompaniment and support.
Yeah, no, that's great. But let me ask you this: in terms of the arson incident, was that ever resolved? Was anybody brought to justice?
No, not at all. So there's still essentially 4 open and ongoing investigations to our knowledge, from the local level to the state level and the federal level. And we have not heard any updates or received any questions about what happened since August of 2019.
Yeah, what a shame. And it also speaks to how what you all have been fighting against 90 years itself continues to bubble up. I always remind people, we need to know our history because they know theirs.
That's right.
And if folk didn't get that on January 6th, which really, if you look at January 6th, a lot of that was kind of some of that Confederate Civil War cosplay.
Totally.
Right? And I'm sure some of the people there, maybe most of them, thought that's all they were going to do. They were just going to play dress up. But then that momentum got going and that mob mentality, and it turned into something else. And, we've got to, I did an interview on the Times of London radio, and they couldn't understand, Ashley, why I wasn't more optimistic about the Chauvin trial. Mm-hmm. Oh, but the cops are speaking. I said, yeah, well, no, that's fine, but we've been burned so many times. We have PTSD that so few cops are convicted. Yeah. And then we see stuff like January 6th. We won in November. Like you mentioned, we won in Georgia. Those are Black and a Jew elected to Senate in Georgia. That ain't supposed to happen. But we see what the pushback is. And that's why what you do and what the Highlander Center is continuing to do is so important. So in that vein, and as you've been navigating the challenges and all that during COVID and the distance, are you finding since January 6th, or maybe even before then, are you finding since last summer's reckoning, so to speak, more people reaching out to you and reaching for your services?
Yeah, this is a good question. I mean, I think to your previous point, it's like we're not naively pessimistic. We are recognizing, I say working at Highlander and being a part of the Black liberation movement and the Southern freedom movement is like living in the past, present, and future all at the same time. And I say that because we would be neglectful at least to not remember that part of the reason that folks are pessimistic about the outcome of that trial or about the white conservative party in this country and right by Black folks just because it's the right thing to do, that pessimism is informed by literally centuries worth of examples of the state and law enforcement and white supremacist organizations colluding with each other in blowback to the liberation of our folks and particularly the self-determination and governance of our people. And not just Black people as a monolith, like working class people of all stripes. And so do I think that and I don't think that just to be frank, I don't think that the tension around that I think concrete assessment of concrete conditions about what is likely to happen that is rooted in a historic and material analysis of what we've been through is separate from the reality that I think we've been sort of, especially as Southern people, rural people, and poor people, and Black people have been screaming, is that like these things are not isolated incidents. It's not shocking that after Charlottesville, after the Black churches in Louisiana were on fire, which was within a week of the Highlander arson, when the mosque was on fire in Jerusalem, and now the many, many, many mass shootings by white supremacist members or folks that are influenced by conspiracy theories and white supremacist organizations, that an insurrection on January 6th be like the time that we clutch our pearls because we can't believe it's happening. And so in terms of like people being interested in Highlander's program, sure. I mean, we're busy and we've been busy. I mean, before we started to like physically shut down the facilities to keep people safe from the pandemic, it was nothing to just on the site to be reaching 6,000 people a year. That's not even including folks that we met online or communities that asked us to come and do movement accompaniment and support with them in the field, right? I feel like if anything, being able to go virtual and include that in our sort of tactical tool belt to work our programs and do political education, popular education, is just given us even more capacity to talk to people all over the world. And I want to be clear, that's always been true for Highlander. We've always been a local org with a regional priority with national and international impact. And I think that what that means for us now is that we actually have a responsibility to showing up and showing out and helping to support folks be like literally remembering and reclaiming their radical legacies of resistance and the tactics that they've used to be able to win. I think that it would be a shame if folks thought that people were coming to Highlander just because they were reacting to white supremacist violence. I think people are coming because they really want to reclaim what was already theirs, that white supremacy and capitalism, homophobia, and all the things try to steal from them.
Yeah.
It's a home place.
Right. And they've not stopped, and so we can't either. You know? Yeah,
and I think to your point, it's like both around like the global nature of the attacks, right? It's like it is not shocking to most of the folks that would pay attention to make it plain that, you know, Trump was not unilateral. Like he said America first, but he was actually building with, you know, fascist and authoritarian, you know, dictators all over the globe. But what's real is like also law enforcement does that too, right? And so do these white supremacist organizations. It's not shocking when we think about like the arson at Highlander that the symbol of the white power movement that was spray painted in our parking lot was also etched into the gun of the mass shooter at Christchurch, New Zealand, right? These folks are building a global movement around white nationalism, white populism, white conservatism, you know, fascist tendencies, authoritarian tendencies. And I frankly believe that it's in response to the victories that we've been building.
Yeah. No, I would agree. You know, what you said about living in the past, present, and future. I was in a conversation in a meeting rather with Dr. Alva Carruthers of the Proctor Conference. And she was reminding all of us in the meeting that as African people, time is not linear, but circular. And so, you know, that's why folks, it feels like that. You feel like, you know, everything's happening at once, but that's one of the reasons for it. By the same token, what you all have been able to do is challenge the divisions that exist in these disparate groups. In fact, you are referred to as an Afrolachian. Tell our audience what that means, and especially what it means in the context of bringing urban and rural together.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm a Southern supremacist. Everybody that knows me knows it. I believe that as goes the South, so goes the nation isn't an opinion. It's a fundamental fact. If you didn't believe it before 2020, hopefully we showed you better than we could tell you in the last electoral cycle. But why does it matter that I call myself an Afrolachian is that one, this myth that the only stories to tell about the South or Appalachia in particular, where I was born and raised, as being synonymous with whiteness or white supremacy. It's like, no, actually, where I'm from, my mother was like a member of the Black Panther Party, Nikki Giovanni as well, right? Like when you think about Appalachia and you think, oh, that's those like backwoods hillbillies. It's also like Bessie Smith and Usher Raymond, like it's also, when you think about radical legacies of resistance, you don't get the abolitionist movement just because of New York and California, no shade, no foul, but like the first abolitionist newspaper was written in Jonesboro, Tennessee, right? Even if I was going to spread outside of my sort of central Appalachian roots, I would offer that like even that very party that my mother raised me up in, that politic that came from that Black radical party, the first organizing in the Black Panther Party wasn't in like Oakland, it was in Lowndes County, Alabama, with Gwen Patton and those folks, right? So I think why I proudly identify as Afrolachian and really hold fast to the remembering of the radical, like revolutionary legacy of resistance of the South is because it means something to be from a place that historically folks use to erase the reality of rural Black people, right? That Appalachia is not synonymous with whiteness is a stamp for me around using making sure that my identity around being Afrolachian is clear. Then I also think partly why it's important is because, even when we think beyond the abolitionist movement or just what people immediately think of as in terms of Black radical traditions, it's like, the last time that this country bombed its own people, if you're thinking about rural work in particular in Southern history, some people would argue move in Philly, right? And that's a fair assessment. But what I'd also offer is that in terms of like the labor movement, which is arguably one of the most historic movements that this country's ever seen, is like the battle at Blair Mountain, where a Black-led working class, multiracial united front stood up to capitalism through fighting back against their bosses in the mines, and the state that protected the bosses over its people. The state literally bombed those workers, right? So I think there's something to me about learning who I was in relationship to that inheritance that I felt like the state and white supremacy and capitalism were stealing from me. And so I wasn't the person that had the good sense to create it. Folks like the Afrolachian poets, creatives, artists, visionaries, were the ones that I think helped some of us youngins find our way to being proud of what it means to reclaim a long legacy of like free Black folks in these mountains, folks that were determined, regardless of the state's characterization of them or erasure of them, to say that they were worth investing in.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So your mom was in the Black Panther Party. You're now active in the movement for Black Lives, aren't you?
Sure. I was around in December of 2014 when we started it.
Yeah. How has that been able to intersect with the work that you've been doing at the Highlander Center, the movement for Black Lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of ways. I think one, Highlander has had ebbs and flows in different frontline struggles. And I think that even our commitment to what it means to have transitioned from a traditionally white-led organization to a Black-led organization has just shifted the amount of capacity that we have to actually support Black-led work in the region in a real committed and long-term way. Not at the expense of any other work. We're a school, so we don't pick our students, right, or our teachers, but we are committed to actually showing up and showing out in support of the larger social movement in U.S. history that has been being built for generations, but that our commitment to and capacity support has gone up and down. I think the other thing that I would say is, like, again, we got 186 acres in the foothills of the Smokies, right? So when the movement for Black Lives has needed space, or organizations, the 150 some odd organizations in the network and growing that need a place to be, either for strategy development or rest and respite or leadership development and training, they've got a place to go, right? And that's not only for the movement for Black Lives, but for all social movements. But I think, like, if I was really getting into the nitty gritty, what I hope we're doing is, like, both because the South is the largest geographic region in the United States, but even more importantly because it's the place where the highest concentration of Black people in this country live, that the movement for Black Lives be really committed to the important work of local power building, particularly in the South across the urban and rural divide. And I think that's, if you go on our website, we're super transparent. Our 5-year plan, our strategic plan is on the website. It's called Black Power Rising. And you can see for yourself, like, our commitment to doing that local base building and organizing work on the ground across the region, and across the country. So I think that there's been both a commitment to sort of organizing ourselves out of a job, for the sake of liberation and actually really being committed to seeing it in our lifetime. And the opportunity to, like, not build strategy that's ahistoric by being in relationship with an institution that carries so much of the weight of the bearing of the history of our movement, the Black liberation movement. So I hope that if we've contributed anything as Highlander, other than capacity building, et cetera, is a connection to a history that reminds us that we're not the first, last, or only to do the work.
Yeah. So, and of course, the Highlander Center is continuing many of its programs, raising money. By the way, you mentioned a place to meet. I'm simply listening. You would just cross my mind. Whenever we can all gather again, I'm involved in 2 or 3 organizations that could stand a place to come and meet and get themselves together, if you know what I mean.
True.
Yeah. Really. Because, I mean, you need, in this, it's so hard, as you know, to focus in all this hustle and bustle. I'm here in New York. So I got a meeting tonight. I'm going to tell you, we need to figure out a way to go down to the Highlander Center one of these days.
True.
Get ourselves together and get refocused. But if I'm not mistaken, you're raising money. You're going to build a new Septima Clark Learning Center. Is that?
We built it. It's up. So
okay.
The week after, we always are fundraising, just in part because so much of our movement accompaniment and support actually isn't hoarding the resources to Highlander. It's moving the resources from Highlander to the ground, to grassroots organizations, some of whom don't even have C3 infrastructure, to be able to receive funds. And so, to be honest, we give a lot of money away, or we use it for people to be able to travel to us to learn or to get rest and respite to, we've been closed, for big groups. So we've been underground railroading people away from harm, whether that was white supremacist violence or state-sanctioned violence against their communities. And so, just making sure there's enough resources to make sure people can access it when they need it. And I think a big lesson for us, too, is making sure that we've got resources on deck when the next attack happens, so that we can support, or when the next crisis hits, so that we can support not only the sort of rapid response work, but also the recovery work and the long haul movement building work that folks don't get investments in because funders don't find it interesting. It blew my mind. I was just a regular ragtag organizer before I was the first Black woman executive director of Highlander. I had no idea how philanthropy worked. Really, not truthfully. I knew, I maybe had some political assumptions around like charity versus solidarity, and I'd maybe heard through the movement grapevine of the Black liberation movement about how philanthropy had been used as a tool to destroy Black movements sometimes, right? But I didn't know the details. And when I became an executive director, I found out that only 4% of all philanthropic dollars in this country go to the South, the U.S. South. You can imagine how much of that 4% then goes to Black-led organizing, goes to rural organizing, goes to the organizing of like impoverished people that are trying to do radical root cause work, right? Wow. And so, to be honest, I think part of Highlander's role in the fundraising work is actually to push folks that can give to give in ways that are not harmful to movement, right? So we do a lot of that. But I want to tell you about the Septima Clark Learning Center. I mean, one, it was like, again, we were committed, and me and the Reverend Alan Maxfield of the Disciples tradition as my co-executive director. I handpicked him. People were like, oh man, as soon as they pick a Black woman, then they decide to go to a co-directorship with this white guy. I said I wanted that. I said I wanted that because, one, we're a multiracial organization, and two, we're still Black-led. But the point being that if we conceded the territory of whiteness, somebody would fill the vacuum. And I trusted him. He was the white guy I trusted. And it's been an incredible journey. I wouldn't do it without him. But both of us in our tenure knew that we wanted to reclaim and retell and amplify the stories of Black folks, particularly Black women, who made the Highlander Center what it is, right? Like, it's an easy story to find about Miles Horton, and more of like Zilphia Horton and, John Gaventa and Mike Clark and Pamela Jean McMichael and all these incredible leaders, Pete Seeger, Guy Candy Carawan, right? Like people are active in telling those stories. I haven't always, and even the stories of some of our Black folks, right? It's like they'll talk about Rosa Parks coming to train at the Highlander Center, but they don't talk about the fact that she was a board member, right? That you don't get to an Ashley Henderson executive directorship had she not served to preserve the organization, to make sure that the organization could survive white supremacist sanctioned attacks on the infrastructure. You'll hear about Miles Horton saying you can padlock a building, but you can't padlock an idea, but not hear about the never-ending meetings that Black folks stood in as board members to make sure that we were legally protected and had some infrastructure, right? So one of those stories that we wanted to make sure to tell was the story of Septima Clark, both as the grandmother of the civil rights movement, as I would argue the world's most excellent teacher, right? A woman that can you imagine like what it meant to teach and train and create popular education space for hundreds of thousands of Black people before the internet, before you could just get on an airplane, before cell phones, before social media, when it was still kind of illegal for you to be doing it. Right? like she did it, and she came and served at Highlander. The reason that SCLC and Dorothy Cotton ultimately got the project of freedom schools and citizenship schools was because of the attack on Highlander. And Miss Clark had the wherewithal to be like, hey, Dorothy, come take it, right? Be prepared to take it and run the ball because the movement needs to still keep going as we figure out what's next for Highlander. And so we wanted to honor her. And she also served on the board of directors with Miss Rosa as well. And so we made it a commitment that we wanted to build something that honored her legacy with support from her family. And so March of 2019, we were white supremacists. The next week, we broke ground on the Septima Clark Learning Center. And yeah, it's a beautiful building. We did a virtual grand opening with members of Miss Clark's family, her children and grandchildren. It was a sacred time together. And when COVID passes and more people can gather safely, we will absolutely be inviting people to come and check out the archives that are going to be there, the library that will be there, the bookstore that will be there, and we'll be able to host more groups coming to meet and do their strategy building or their leadership development and training because we have space in the Septima Clark Learning Center. So we're proud to honor her legacy.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, congratulations on that as well. More MIP after this message.
Hey there, this is Christina Gonzalez, and I'm so excited for you to check out my new podcast, Politics of Food. On this show, we explore the political, economic, and social implications of food creation and consumption, both locally and worldwide.
Should we eat first or should we protest first? Like, okay, let's organize, let's talk to the press, let's get our word out, and then let's sit down and eat.
Follow Politics of Food with Christina Gonzalez at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your shows.
So, Ashley, as we climb out of this plague and things, hopefully within the next year, we'll get back to some semblance of normalcy. Let our audience know what are some of the specific issue priorities and programmatic priorities for the Highlander Center.
Absolutely. So, you can go on our website and see the methodologies. But in terms of specific issue areas and programming, and again, this wasn't necessarily because we just had good sense. It was because we were good listeners. We listened to folks in the South that said what they wanted. Was that there's specific questions and need for intensive grappling with questions of democracy and governance and with questions of the economy, right? Like, what does it mean to actually prioritize the building of an economy that is good for our people and good for our planet? And what do we mean when we talk about self-determination and governance, right? And so we brought lots of people together to develop a curriculum called Mapping Our Futures. You get that curriculum on our website, highlandercenter.org. It's free. All you have to do is go on the website and get it, just download it. And so we've been creating spaces all across the country, virtually and in person before COVID, to bring people together to grapple with some of these questions around, like, what would you actually do if you controlled the economy? If you had dollars and cents that you could spend on investment and community solutions that you all control? And what decisions would you make about how those dollars are distributed if you governed yourself, right? And what does that look like? What does that look like inside systems that exist? And what does it look like to build alternatives to the system that exists that you actually have more control over in an interdependent way and not a codependent way with the state? And so that's one of our priorities is this sort of economics and governance work. A second priority of ours is again, this sort of commitment to lifelong leadership development and organizing training and doing that in an intergenerational way. So we have some of the best youth programming I've ever experienced. I also came out of some of it. There's a children's justice camp for youngins that are about like the age of 6 to 12. And then there's Seeds of Fire, which is for folks that are like 13 through college age. There are fellowships for young people. Those young people then control their own programming and dictate what they want to learn and help teach each other in a sort of peer mentorship kind of way. Even with our Seeds of Fire work, they decided they wanted their own fund to be able to support other youth organizing work that was happening on the ground all over the South. So these young people also are learning again about how to collectively make decisions about money for movement, which has been a really beautiful experience. They've been prioritizing work around healing justice and racial justice and economic justice for the last few years. I would also then offer that we're learning about how to be good stewards and in right relationship with the land that we're on. So we're interrogating, land justice work and help support the starting of the Black Land and Power Project that the National Black Food and Justice Alliance now holds, that both was about figuring out ways that we could build infrastructure to support Black land-based institutions like a Highlander Center, like a Penn Center and others, but also how we then support Black farmers who had been disproportionately disenfranchised by the state. And so we became members of the National Black Food Justice Alliance and are continuing to do that sort of land and food justice work. And then, there's many, many more. We're committed to being in the movement for Black lives, the rising majority. And our work with the Frontline most recently has been exciting because it's actually making some determinations around what is and is not acceptable in regards to how social movements respond to the electoralizing of a movement, particularly those of us that are rooted in the South. So, flanking and supporting organizations that are doing voter registration and education work, which the state of Tennessee tried to criminalize over the last electoral cycle. Making sure that people understand these bills and experiments with building, people's movement assemblies like they're doing in Jackson and like we've been doing regionally is a priority for us, is figuring out how do we create the spaces for folks not only to learn together, but then to practice together and sum up those lessons to be able to actually transform the conditions that we're in. So go on the website. We've got tons of programs. We're supporting lots of programs that grassroots organizations are moving. And that's our commitment, is both to challenge ourselves around a central question, which we think is around economics and governance, to do that sort of lifelong leadership development and training work across a lot of modalities, and to really make a commitment to incubating and investigating radical work that might be on the precipice of the next big win for our movement. So kind of those three buckets of work that are a priority for Highlander.
And being prepared for it.
Yep.
As opposed to reacting to
absolutely
being on offense. And see again, this is what to me is so sacred about the work you're doing. Like I said, those who are against us never stop their organizing. A lot of times, what do? We'll get a victory. And then we'll just exhale and say, oh, we got this. And, if nothing, and I've been saying to people, if nothing else, what we learned from Georgia in January is that the unprecedented enthusiasm for a special election, even amongst white voters,
on
our side. Folk don't vote special elections in America. But we've got to make that type of voter enthusiasm and participation second nature. And it can be every time. We got to start it back again from scratch. This is why you need to go vote. No, it needs to be like that because they get it. That's why they're trying to suppress it in the way that they have. And so again, I think what you're doing, folks, this is important. Movement, Frederick Douglass summed it up in 2 words. This is really eternal vigilance. It doesn't stop. It's not, oh, we got this victory. Oh, we got Joe. Some people say we got Joe Biden elected. Better yet, we can go back to 2008. Even some we got black presidents, so we good. No. They started clowning even more. Our enemies. Right. So, folks, what the Highlander Center has done and continues to do is remind us that we can't stop, won't stop. We must be involved. And you heard our dear sister say she's fundraising. They always raise them, but they need it because they're supporting a lot of efforts. My mind is going 4% of the philanthropy.
4%. So imagine let's imagine 100%, right? If there's a 100% pot of money, my understanding is that 1% of that 100% goes to like social justice charity work, right? 1% of that 100% pile of money. Some of the rest of it might go to science. Some of it might go to like space exploration, right? Like there's wealthy people spend their money on a lot of other things that it's not do-gooder work, right? So if that's true, and only 1% of the billions of dollars that these mostly rich white men hold goes to charity, then only 4% of that 1% goes to the largest geographic region in the United States where the highest concentration of black people live. Like, if that's not an extension of chattel slavery and relationship, like if that's to me the argument of why there needs to be reparations, right? It's like very clear that there is a racialized relationship to capital accumulation in this country, right? And that's why, I think again, it's like it's not by shock that the movement for Black Lives then is like, yo, we got to be anti-capitalist because black people can't be free. If that extractive profit over people economic structure continues to be, right? That's just not, we got centuries worth of evidence to prove that to be true. So, I think that why the fundraising stuff is interesting and important to me is not because it's like we want to grow infinitely, or be in a codependent relationship with philanthropy. The point to me is that we get to be unapologetically independent of philanthropy because we sustain it ourselves, one. And two, we just dropped our most recent annual report for the last 2 years, for 2019 and 2020. And it blew my mind how many individual donations we were getting. Small donations, like $5 here, a couple dollars there, from all over the world, because people believe in the idea that we keep us safe, right? I'm sure it was in no small way because people were like, we're going to show up and show out for Highlander as it's always shown up and shown out for us in the wake of the fire. But it's also because I think folks know that like being in a codependent relationship with philanthropy is not actually building independent political power for our people. So the more that we give to it, like all of our staff, all of our board give, like the reason that we do that is so we can do what we want to do in terms of, building radical infrastructure that shows up consistently for our movements. And I don't think there's any way we would have gotten to 90 years old next year had it not been for folks' commitments to doing that.
Folks, those are all the reasons why we invite you to go to highlandercenter.org, read and understand the history, from Septima Clark to SNCC. Some of you may remember over time seeing the billboard that was taken out with Dr. King and Rosa Parks sitting in a Highlander classroom and accusing them of being at a school for communists.
Communist training school, that's right.
That's right, communist training school. Well, that's the Highlander Center. If you remember that photograph, that's what that's all about. And we want you to support the Highlander Center, highlandercenter.org. Learn more about it. This will no longer be, shamefully, a singular visit to ask. We want to have her back. We want to do this. I've got to come down there.
Always welcome. Open invite.
It's a shame I've not been there yet, having grown up right there in the state. Like I said, I left and I'm up here in the big city. I don't know what I'm doing. But I've got to, next time I'm home, I'm going to come check it out and encourage others to avail themselves of the opportunities. Somebody want to go have a retreat at the Hilton. There's been no Hilton. What's wrong with you? It's a movement organization. Why do you want to go to Hilton for? They got me, Mark, you crazy. I said, no, we got to go places where we can do. They're going to send them this money to the Hilton. Anyway.
Hey,
don't get me started.
I mean, because of the relationship to movement and to Proctor and to the Southern Freedom Movement, there's just something sacred about those places like the Haley Farm, the Penn Center, and the Highlander Center, and so I think there's something special about being in it. I think there's something in the sauce around what it means to be in a space where people have been coming together for decades, almost a century, to figure this stuff out. There's something about sitting in those rocking chairs in a circle in that space where people have hammered it out.
Yeah, that's right. Do what we got to do. We do what we got to do. HighlanderCenter.org. Ashley, so great to talk to you. So proud of you and all you represent. And it is high time that someone like you, and a Black woman in particular, is in the position you're in. They say let me ask you about that, because the conversation too is that this is the moment of Black women. People are late to the party recognizing the electoral political power of Black women. Yet, I just did a show yesterday on the jobs report.
Right.
You know the group of people that have lost more jobs in this pandemic is Black women. So wait a minute, y'all. Black women all the time. But is this really what it's supposed to be? Are we really handling business on behalf of Black women like we're supposed to?
Yeah. And then which Black women? Is it all Black women? Is it just cisgender Black women? I think there's so much to unlock there. I think that what's real is, like, again, this past, present, and future stuff. It's like, there's always been Black women in leadership. Whether I'm talking about like Harriet Tubman or Sojourner Truth or Bernice Johnson Reagan and Margaret Bullock and Judy Richardson, Jennifer Lawson, or Tamara Woodard, my mama, or my grandmama, Helen Woodard, that was, cleaning houses on Lookout Mountain, but also raising revolutionaries. It's like Fannie Lou Hamer, right? It's like, I love Stacey Abrams with my whole heart, even when I disagree with her. But I don't have to start with a Stacey Abrams or a Jessica Bird or a Rukia Lumumba or a Kayla Reid, those incredible Black women of the 21st century that are doing this work. I can talk about what it meant for my people to be from Kilmichael, Mississippi, learning under the leadership of folks like Fannie Lou Hamer in Sunflower County. Right? It's like this is a long arc with a beautiful horizon of possibility around what it means to have a movement that is leaderful, with people who are disciplined and rigorous in their commitment to being excellent in their work for the liberation of Black people. And I think a lot of different kinds of people, regardless of gender, show up and show out in leadership. I think about the folks in Black Men Build and some of the incredible trans organizations like SNAPCO, Solutions Not Punishment Coalition in Atlanta, and so many others. So I think it's beyond the sort of gender binary, but I do think that there is something about the way that we vision what we deserve and not just what we would concede to under the visionary leadership of some of these Black women that I've gotten the pleasure of working with. I think it was like, people would have told us that organizing to win in Georgia was a pipe dream 10 years ago. And it truly was, in my experience of organizing in Georgia, Black women, intergenerationally, they were like, no, we can do this. It wasn't one charismatic leader. They worked together across organizations, across sectors, right? And say Tamika, Latasha, Stacy, Jessica, right? Like, all of these people came together and said, like, no, we can do this, right? And for every Georgian example I can give another example in another Southern state, Right? It doesn't shock me when I look at the leadership of the movement for Black Lives and I see Black women in droves. Right? So I think there is something unique about this moment around the celebration of the leadership of Black women. I think the flip side to your point is that we actually have to get in a practice of what it means to like undo patriarchal violence. For real, not just to value feminisms or womanisms, but to actually do what we have to do to dismantle what we've learned and how we practice being in relationship with each other that actually stops the harm, not just says that we value the idea of stopping the harm. And I think once we figure that out, we'll be there. We'll be practicing liberation. I think that's our role right now.
Yeah.
Figure out how we practice it right now and don't just wait till the glory comes.
Yeah. No, we got to get to that for sure. Wow, this has been amazing. Folks, HighlanderCenter.org. And as I said, this won't be the last time we hear from Ashley. And we're going to go down there and spend some time there as well, as I hope you will also. In the meantime, send a few dollars. Please, man, please, sir. Support this effort. People talking about, what can I do? You know, the thing about movement, we're not always in the streets. Sometimes that's not what's going on. But in between time, you can learn, you can read, you can organize, and you can give. And we would want you to give to the Highlander Center. HighlanderCenter.org. Read all about it, and you will be so inspired, as I'm sure you are, hearing the words of our dear sister, our dear queen, Ashley Woodard Henderson. Ashley, thank you for joining us on Make It Plain today.
Absolutely. We love Make It Plain. We love you, Reverend Mark.
All right. I love you too. HighlanderCenter.org, everybody.
Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, subscribe, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.
Nice buns, soft, fluffy, and ultra-low net carbs. Discover Hero Bread, the delicious ultra-low net carb bread with incredible taste and texture. Hero Bread has 0 grams of sugar and is under 100 calories per serving, plus high in fiber with 5 to 10 grams of protein per serving. Available on Amazon.com, Walmart.com, and at hero.co. That's HERO.co. Delicious, ultra-low net carb Hero Bread buns and tortillas. Soft and fluffy, high in fiber, and with 0 grams of sugar, up to 10 grams of protein, coming in at under 100 calories. Order today at hero.co and use the code AH10 to get 10% off your first purchase. That's AH10 at hero.co. HERO.co. Order from hero.co now and get 10% off your first purchase with promo code AH10. That's 10% off with code AH10. HERO.co.